Welcome back to Live Free Legal, where we equip women to stand strong in the courtroom and in life. I'm Tiffany Lesnik, family law attorney and founder of Live Free Legal. And today I am thrilled to welcome back a guest, Carlie Spencer. You loved her the first time she joined us on my legal Q&A on Facebook Live. She is an attorney. She is an author of the Guide to a Successful Marriage. She is known as the Prenup Girl. And Carlie's mission is to help couples create strong, fair, and protective prenups or prenuptial agreements. And today we're digging into how these agreements play out when domestic violence is a part of that picture. If you've ever wondered whether a prenup could protect you or feared it might be used against you, this is a conversation you do not want to miss. So thank you so much, Carlie, for being here with us today. Can you tell us a little bit about your book and what inspired you to write the Guide to a Successful Marriage?
Absolutely. So as a family lawyer, and some would commonly refer to us as divorce lawyers, I spend a lot of time with people in the toughest chapters of their life. And even when you get a win in court, so often it means that you're splitting time 50% with your kids. So that's really a loss from the 100% you had before. And so I realized it was really heavy, and I wanted to stay in my family law lane, but do something where I could celebrate with my clients. And so I realized prenups were a great way to do that. I can say congratulations on your engagement. This is a great chapter, but let's also make sure that you're set up for financial success with your spouse going forward, because prenups aren't really a contract for divorce, as a lot of people think. They're a contract for marriage, and it's a great conversation starter to make sure you know how you're going to split your finances. Are you going to have joint accounts? Are you going to have separate accounts? Are you going to have small separate accounts to have money that you can give gifts to one another? Are you going to make financial plans together? We're living in a world, people are getting married later, they're having more assets going into the marriage rather than right after high school or college like we saw decades prior. And so you have to make those decisions, and we're living in a more separate finance world. But what does that mean? I have people say, oh, I know what we're going to do. We're going to have separate finances. And I start asking them questions, and they have no idea how to answer them because they haven't had those conversations. So it's meant to be a conversation starter. It's written very fun. There are characters from Schitt's Creek, Friends, Gossip Girl, celebrities in there to show you what the conversations can look like. There's a guide in the back that you can fill out. We don't do collaborative prenups in North Carolina where I practice. Some states do, but I tell everybody, in essence, I only do collaborative prenups. I want to work with couples where they sit down and fill out all of the worksheets together, they have the conversations, and they come to me just to memorialize it in writing and make sure that it's enforceable.
Okay, so a collaborative prenup may not be feasible for folks who are potentially in a coercive control or domestic abuse relationship. Where can they get your book?
It's available on barnesandnoble.com as well as Amazon, and there is a direct link. So if you find me on any of my social media channels, I've got that in there as well. But Barnes and Noble and Amazon should get you there.
Okay, sounds great. So if a woman suspects that her soon-to-be husband may be abusive, but she still proceeds with the marriage, what clauses should she be wary of?
Definitely be very wary of waiving any type of spousal support. It's going to be hard to undo that later, even if you're in you're being coerced into the prenup, because typically, whether you're represented or unrepresented, if you have a good lawyer writing it, they're going to have clauses in there that you're signing and attesting to. This was voluntary. This was knowing. I knew exactly what I was doing, and I was not under duress or coercion. So don't waive spousal support. Another thing we've talked about is you can do, I'm going to call it a quasi-sunset clause, so you can invalidate portions of your prenup based on marital misconduct. And that's going to mean different things. In North Carolina, there's a statute that defines it. You can define it in your prenup. So a lot of times we go straight to cheating, that it's infidelity. But you could put clauses in there about any kind of physical abuse and things like that, which, when we've discussed before, it would be really hard, I think, to put a clause that says, in the event of domestic violence, whatever it is you want to say. because people are going to be very weary about signing that. I'm going to be weary to put that in there if my client specifically asks it. And so having a marital misconduct section where within that you have cheating and infidelity, no one's really going to bat an eye at that. And then you also have domestic violence, I think could be a really great way to have that protection, because in the event you're talking about someone is suspecting abuse or already going through an abusive relationship, it's a bad trauma cycle,
right.
and sometimes it's so hard to break free. So they're not admitting it to it themselves. If they're going to go through with it, they're probably not going to admit it to their attorney.
Right. So when you say sunset clause, you mean there's like an independent clause within the prenup itself that says in the event that these things occur, certain sections of the prenuptial agreement are no longer enforceable or valid.
Yes. So for example, the most common way we use a sunset clause is maybe there's a waiver of spousal support, but it expires in 10 years. And so if 10 years of the marriage passes, it's usually duration specific would be kind of what I see most often. And then there's also infidelity clauses that are specific to cheating. So I kind of think meshing them and defining your marital misconduct and saying, you know, if you can't convince your spouse to get rid of the waiver of spousal support, putting that sunset clause on that provision in the event of marital misconduct, which would include domestic violence, could be a good option. Another thing you can do, and this is what's great about prenups, you can be really creative. You can do all kinds of things. So say you've decided you're going to split the marital assets 50-50, and let's just think about a house, for example. So regular prenup says 50% to both spouses. Well, you could have a clause in there that says in the event of marital misconduct, including domestic violence, it's going to be an 80-20 split or 100-0. Now, that's probably going to be hard for any attorney on either side to let their client sign, but you could have an offset of percentages on the assets as well. So it doesn't have to be invalidating specific clauses. It could actually override clauses as well.
Got it. And, you know, the new term kind of for domestic abuse or domestic violence is coercive control. And so a tip for the ladies out there might be, instead of saying if domestic violence occurs, maybe using the term if coercive control occurs, your new spouse or soon-to-be spouse might be more willing to sign one of those, a prenup with a sunset clause in the agreement that has like coercive control in lieu of domestic violence. I think when we use the word violence, that, you know, very off-putting, especially to an abuser. So just a tip there. What can our viewers look for when it comes to an abuser pushing them to sign a prenup? Like, what kind of red flags might they look out for?
Yeah, I think the biggest one, and I want to be cautious with this because sometimes people don't think about it to the end. I get last minute prenups a lot. I just got one that came in. They're getting married in November. So it's not automatically a red flag if it's last minute, but I would start, it's an orange flag. You should start looking at it and be like, maybe I should have caution if it's paired with other things. So if they bring it to you at the last minute, if they're like, well, you need to sign this or we're not getting married, those paired together is concerning. Just last minute saying, I forgot about this, I've dropped the ball, we've been busy with wedding planning, or someone gave me this book and my friend called me, and I have, you know, a colleague of mine called and said, my buddy's getting married in a month and a half, is that too late to do it? He never thought about it. I'm convincing him as a lawyer that he needs to. So last minute is not always bad, but paired with anything else, or, you know, threats of not getting married if it's not signed, or really unfair terms. So last minute and a combination of those. So again, if, you know, it's a month and a half out and then you get the contract and now it's a month out and that prenup gives the other side basically everything and you waive spousal support, those together, especially if you're not already experiencing abuse. And so that's kind of to look for. This might be someone that is going to be financially manipulative and abusive later.
Right.
Not always, but that's when I'd start looking at those red flags and getting concerned.
Right. And, you know, ladies, you know, these guys are very, very intense right from the beginning of the relationship, you know, and they start the love bombing like immediately. So generally they're going to be really intense with their behaviors with regard to the prenuptial agreement, you know, putting a lot of pressure on you to sign it, nagging you, reminding you over and over again, we have an appointment, you need to come to this appointment, I need you to read this agreement, I need you to sign this, I need you to sign this. So any of those types of behaviors, I would say, are also a red flag. And I know we did talk about waiver of alimony or spousal support. One of the things that Carlie and I talked about before we got started is that if you are the primary breadwinner, like if you're the one who actually has the majority of the assets, you're the one making a lot of the money, and there's concern that he's going to quit his job, play video games all day, or do nothing and mooch off of you. So a waiver of alimony in that case may actually protect you. So I think it really depends on where you are before you get married, right? Are you the one who is bringing in the majority of the income, or is he the one bringing in the majority of the income, and you're going to be reliant on his income? You know, if you're going to be reliant on his income, waiving spousal support, probably not a good idea for you. If you're the one bringing in the majority of the income and have the majority of the assets, having some of those restrictive clauses for him may be helpful in an abusive relationship, especially when he decides to quit his job or he gets fired multiple times because he's got social boundaries that he continues to violate.
And I'm seeing more and more of that, where the woman is the breadwinner and she has multiple businesses a lot, and he struggles to keep a job or has already said that he's going to stay home with the kids. And there's nothing wrong in that scenario if you guys agree mutually and it's a respectful relationship. So don't get me wrong that I think that can't happen, but I am seeing a lot of women come in, and it's interesting because you've probably thought this before too, and you know, you're like, you're so smart and successful and driven, but they latch onto you like a leech, and there's just something that pulls you in and you can't see it until you're out of it. And I just remember this woman having a conversation, and it was that, you know, she was an executive at this company, and husband had stayed home to raise the kids, which was great, except they were all driving age at this point, and, you know, couldn't get a job, wouldn't get a job. And she's like, I understand he gets half of my retirement and half of this and half of that, and that's really sad. And she said, oh, and I also have to pay him $5,000 a month in alimony for the next 10 years. You're just like, that's not how that was supposed to happen.
Right.
So it sometimes you're going to want that spousal support in there.
Right. If somebody's already in a marriage and they did not sign a prenuptial agreement from the outset, are there other contracts that they can enter into after marriage that will help protect them?
Yeah, so you can do a post-nuptial agreement. I just call them post-nups for short. I shorten prenup and post-nup. I try, just as a side note, to draft all of my agreements as plain language as possible, because I think we get so bogged down in legalese, and then we hand it to these sometimes unrepresented parties, and they have no idea what it says. I think you should be able to understand your own agreement, because what I tell people is when you have it, it is a guide for what to do.
Right.
So you should be able to look at it during your marriage. How did we decide to split assets? What do we do with this? And if you can't understand it, then it's not very helpful as a guide. But post-nups, the only restriction that I would warn people about is you can't waive alimony or spousal support in a post-nup. So that's one of the biggest differences. But this also, for people that are going through abuse or are suspecting that it's getting to that, because it doesn't always start with, you know, physical violence. Often it starts with other manipulation and coercion, of limiting access to financial accounts, or, you know, you're starting to get not a stipend,
an allowance?
An allowance, thank you. So they'll give you an allowance or things like that. So financial control is, at least in my experience, one of the first things that I start seeing. And then we've talked about they isolate you, things like that. So if you are starting to experience that, and you're probably not ready to get out of the marriage yet, you're probably not all the way to divorce, just it takes a while. A post-up is a really good idea, because you can put some of those restrictions on, in the event of marital misconduct. And if you put the right wording and you sandwich it with other things that most people wouldn't have a problem signing, but you make sure to put that coercive control in there and define it, then you can at least protect yourself if you get to the point that either it gets physical or you realize enough is enough and it is time to break this cycle and move on. You will at least have protection that, depending on the state you live, could be better than the default family law rules. Sometimes they favor you. So I think it's good to kind of consult with somebody and see what your options are and figure out, would a post-nup actually protect me more, or would the default laws of the state protect me more? Because sometimes that is the case.
Right. What's the difference between a prenup, a post-nup, and then a separation agreement?
So prenup is going to be your agreement for what happens to your finances in the marriage, after the marriage, if you were to divorce. Postnup is signed after you're already married, and it does the same thing. It's going to talk about how you handle finances in the marriage, assets and debts, what happens in the event of divorce. And then a separation agreement is basically your pre-divorce agreement. And this can vary state to state. North Carolina, we have a year separation requirement, and so separation agreements here, I think, are probably a lot different than other places, because I hear a lot of misconceptions. People come in, they're like, I need this before I separate and leave the house. And very rarely do we have a signed, executed separation agreement before the separation starts in this state. And so that agreement is going to talk about what happens on the divorce that is being planned. Sometimes people reconcile. There is a clause in there for that if it is signed and actually executed. But it is meant to figure out spousal support and the division of assets upon divorce, and try to start having those things being done. So we'll have, potentially deadlines for appraisal, and the house is split 50-50 or 60-40, and when the payment must be made, and things of that nature.
Right. Yeah. So the prenup is really before marriage. Postnup is during, and then separation agreement is anticipation of separation or after separation.
Yes.
Right. So it's the time period, really.
Much more succinct way to put it.
And the separation agreement allows you to actually have terms for custody, whereas can you put terms in a prenup for custody of your children or child support?
You could put the terms in there, and as long as they're complied with, great. Then you don't need to see a lawyer and you don't need to go to court. But they are not enforceable to the full extent that the rest of the prenup, in theory, would be enforceable. So you are not allowed, you can't contract away your rights to be a parent. So it can be evidence of what you guys intended, but a parent is always entitled to file a custody suit in the court to get a judge to rule on the best interest of the child. You can't contract for the child's best interest. So again, can be evidence, but it's not going to be enforceable if one party decides that they want to go file for custody. They're not barred from doing that. You can't waive your rights to custody. So the good news is not everybody realizes that, and they think it's a valid contract, so it never hurts to try to include it and at least get compliance for some period of time and create that status quo. And then if you have to go to court, you've got evidence of what you guys had intentions of doing.
Right. And ladies, if he uses it to try to control custody of the children and say you have no rights to the children, you signed this, just to let you know that's not true, right? You can always, like Carlie said, file a custody action anytime, and those provisions in a prenup are not binding on you. Okay.
And I'm going to interject, same with child support, because that's the one I see more often is someone has said, I've waived child support. And they were the stay-at-home parent. And they're like, well, I can't. I contracted for it. No. You can also always file for child support. So again, you can waive it in a prenup, a postnup, a separation agreement. I don't care what you've waived it in. It might be a valid contract but for that clause, but you can always file for child support. If you are entitled to it, you can follow through with that. So do not let someone tell you otherwise. I hear some of these lies as well, and sometimes it breaks my heart that people have been living this way, believing these lies for so long, and I'm always just grateful that they found their way to me to at least fix it at some point.
Right.
But don't believe it. If you're questioning whether that sounds right, now sometimes the law is wonky. So sometimes it just is the way that it is. But if someone's telling you something and it doesn't feel right, consult an attorney. Don't consult Google. It's wrong a lot. Even ChatGPT. It's a great resource. But there's so much nuance. Talk to an attorney, and you can find attorneys wherever you live. There might not be many, but you can find ones that do free consultations and that can try to answer some of these questions for you. But if it feels weird, it might be. Right. And you might be being manipulated and lied to.
Yeah, and we just did a series on using AI to help you with your legal outcomes. ChatGPT is absolutely not a replacement for solid legal advice, right? It can kind of guide you and where you need to go, but it is absolutely not a replacement. Nor is Google, which is now primarily guided by AI as well.
Yes.
And those are amazing tips. Children, or the state always has a protected interest over children, right? So regardless of what you've signed, unless you have a court order in place, those documents, whether it's a separation agreement, a postnuptial agreement, or a prenuptial agreement, if it relates to children, you always have a right to take that to trial, even despite what your abuser might say. Carlie, can women use domestic abuse as an excuse to get out of a legal document that they signed? Or is it easy to get out of a legal document that they've signed, especially a prenup, using domestic abuse as an excuse?
It's definitely not easy. It's really hard to invalidate because, like I said earlier, you're going to sign. If any lawyer with any worth has written it, there's going to be clauses in there that you've done it willingly, you're not under duress. So then to later claim that is really hard. We talked about this last week. I would be curious, because here's the thing, there's no absolutes in what we do. Court is always a gamble. Right. I would be interested in a case, because I haven't done it, where there was active physical abuse and fear of death potentially at the time of signing. So a really, really high tension, high conflict prenup. I would be curious if that would be maybe the scenario that could, but we don't want to end up in that situation. And it's very possible as well that it also wouldn't invalidate it. So if you sign it, make sure you understand what it's saying and make sure that you are willing to live with it. And that's why some of those clauses to invalidate portions or change the script in the event of violence, abuse, trauma are really, really valuable, because you at least have that safety net. But right. Don't sign it if you're not willing to live with it. Again, I don't think we've seen it really be successful as a defense or as a reason to get out of the prenup and the clauses. Again, haven't seen this one, but I wonder if active physical violence and true fear of death, if that could be proven, that would be the scenario that I think might be possible and still not even a guarantee.
Yeah, but generally speaking, just coercive control in general, not reading it or feeling pushed into signing it, not understanding it or not having representation is not going to be grounds to get you out of these documents. Once you've signed it and they're notarized, and prenups don't have to be notarized in North Carolina, but the other documents do, when it's done, it's non-modifiable, irrevocable. These are very, very important documents, so please seek legal advice before signing these documents. They could have detrimental impact to your long-term future and your children's future potentially. And not because you can contract away your children's rights, but if you waive alimony and you waive rights to assets, you may not have the monetary resources to adequately support your children, which would give him an advantage in a custody action. Right? If you're homeless or couch surfing and he's got the marital home and all the assets that he needs to provide for the children. Yeah. So just a tip there. One more question. For faith-based women who say, I don't really feel good about signing a prenuptial agreement. I don't think this is biblical or the right thing to do. What do you say to women in that context?
It's the hardest part. So I'm a Christian myself, and I get asked that just about being a divorce lawyer. How could you do that? I don't make the decisions. I just help people through them. And I've had people come in, and I can tell they're still not ready. And I'm like, I'm not here to talk you into or out of a divorce. I'm here to help you when you need it. And I think prenups are an even safer space for that, because it isn't, and I said this earlier, but it's not a contract for divorce. It is a contract for marriage. And, if you read through the book, it goes through all the financial conversations you should have. And I'm seeing more and more people not having them before they get married. And that's part of the relationship. And so faith specifically, how much are you going to tithe? What if one party feels strongly about 10% and the other party's like 1 or 0? Mm-hmm. That's a financial decision. That's a financial discussion that you need to be on the same page about. And that's just one of many. And so you've got to think in the long term of, you're not going into it because you expect to get divorced. The same way you don't get life insurance because you expect to drop dead, or car insurance because you expect to be in a car accident tomorrow. It's insurance. So this is marriage insurance, because things happen. And especially with abusive relationships, I'm just thinking so vividly of a client that I worked with and was in a horribly abusive relationship for over 20 years, had multiple children, and came into my office and knew she had to get a divorce and is just beside herself, sobbing throughout the consultation. And it's heartbreaking. And she's like, I'm a Christian. And specifically, I think was Catholic, and was like, I don't believe in divorce. I can't believe I'm here. But they had a domestic violence protective order. And with enough time and space, but there was still, I could still see that evidence of trauma cycle. And I'm thinking to myself, how much easier would this be right now for her if they'd had a prenup? Because you're already mourning the loss of not only your marriage, but in a lot of cases, a sacred religious vow that you've taken. And I don't think you should have to be making these hard financial decisions and having to fight with that person. It would be a lot easier to say, here's what we decided, and this is what we're going to do. So it's insurance for if it doesn't work out, but it's not committing to, I think it might not work out, so here's what we're going to do. And I'll just say this, on a personal level, I'm recently engaged and very early in the relationship, yes. He asked, because, I'm the prenup girl, I have a book about it. He said, are you going to get a prenup? I said, absolutely, and here's what I'm thinking. And we're basically going to share everything. We're keeping business ownership separate because it's just messy. And if I have partners one day, I don't want to deal with that. But I absolutely intend to stay married to him for the rest of my life. Right. But if I don't, this is, and it's not just, again, it's not just about divorce. It's about what you're going to do in the marriage. We know exactly how we're going to join our finances, what accounts we're going to keep separate. We are very well advised on both of each other's finances, assets, debts. And that's the important part in a prenup that people skip, because people are just getting to the altar quickly and they're getting there without having the hard conversations. And it is a business decision. And on a religious context, people don't always like to hear that, but it is the biggest business decision you're going to make in your life. And so you've got to have those conversations. And you just have to remind yourself, it's a contract for marriage. It's not a contract for divorce. It's to make sure that you know what you're going to do with your finances. And I'll say this too, just having those conversations and not actually getting the prenup is still better. At least at a minimum, have the conversations. If you truly in your core, it's against your religious beliefs, I'm not telling you to do it, but by God, have the conversations. Make sure you're on the same page.
Right. It's kind of like legal premarital counseling, right? It's just another form of premarital counseling.
Yes.
And there's nothing unbiblical in the Bible about entering into contracts. And there's nothing unbiblical about husbands and wives or future husbands and wives entering into contracts either, right? It's just a form of manipulation to try to manipulate you into maybe having you sign away rights that he otherwise doesn't want you to have, or taking away assets that you're otherwise entitled to. So just be mindful of that spiritual manipulation, because that's certainly one way abusers will also use coercive control in the spiritual realm. So Carlie, thank you for once again bringing such valuable insight to a topic that can truly make the difference between freedom and financial devastation for so many women. Friends, if you are in an abusive or high conflict relationship, or even if you just want to be wise and prepared, I encourage you to take this information to heart and seek counsel before you sign anything. And remember, preparation is not lack of faith, it's wisdom in action. We'll drop Carlie's book and contact information in the description so you can connect directly. Until next time, stay strong, stay informed, and know you are never alone. Until next time.
Awesome.
Okay, thank you. We probably went longer than that.